Shalom, shalom, everyone. Welcome back to Torah Truth for Today, a channel dedicated to the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and getting back to the truth of God's Word, Torah. The Torah, which is often mistranslated as law, actually means instructions. It's God's divine instruction manual found throughout the pages of the whole Bible, and it's still applicable for our lives today. Before we start, if you're new to the channel, would you do me a favor and hit the like and subscribe button and ring that notification bell, as it really helps YouTube push out the video. With that said, thanks for joining my family and me again as we are continuing our spiritual journey through the land of the Bible. This time we head out to the wilderness of southern Judea and the Dead Sea region to the great fortress Masada. Here is where the incredible story of the famous battle of Jewish zealots in the war against the Roman legion took place, around 73 AD. Good morning. We're here on Mount Scopus, and we're going to be heading off to the Dead Sea and Masada. Going out into the lowest part of the world, the Dead Sea, and we're going to float in it. The story of the Good Samaritan took place between Jericho and Jerusalem. Traditionally, the inn is on the way there, and a little tourist spot. We begin at the Visitor Center, where we can see a detailed bronze model of Masada. This gives a great aerial perspective of what we're about to see up close. Then we head into a little movie room to watch a short film showing footage from the amazing 1981 miniseries Masada, one of the best ever.
Masada is a novel. It's also a historic episode of the talented historian and writer Josephus Flavius wrote about almost 2,000 years ago.
Next, we board the gondolas to start the 1,424-foot ascent to the top. Some hike up the mile-and-a-half snake path, as it is called. It takes about 45 minutes in the sometimes staggering heat. So it's tempting, but I think we're just fine in the nice air-conditioned gondola.
ברוכים הבאים לגן הלאומי מצדה של רשות הטבע והגנים.
Welcome to Masada National Park.
Surrounding us are surreal views all across the Judean desert and the Dead Sea area. This place looks harsh, fierce, and remote, completely desolate, but it is breathtakingly beautiful as well. And to think that in the early days of the Bible, it was lush and green in parts, such as Jericho and the areas surrounding Sodom and Gomorrah. At one time, the Dead Sea nearly reached to Masada, but has since receded to about a mile away. Almost all of what we know about the story of Masada comes from the writings of this first-century historian Flavius Josephus. Josephus was a most fascinating character in history, and his writings are indispensable in reconstructing many of the events surrounding the first century and the Bible. Josephus even wrote about several biblical characters, including Jesus, John the Baptist, James or Jacob, the brother of the Lord, Herod, and many others, adding credibility to the Bible from an outside source that is reliable. Josephus was a Jewish general who was captured in 67 AD by Roman soldiers in a smaller scale event similar to what happened at Masada, and through an amazing turn of events, was even adopted into the family of the Emperor Vespasian. Josephus wrote for Rome and was the translator and liaison between the Romans and the Jews in the events surrounding the destruction of the temple around 70 AD. He was considered a traitor by the Jews, but thankfully his writings were preserved and give us a front row seat of such important events at that time in history. I think it's important to start with a little history lesson and context of Masada. Judea became a Roman client state, and Herod the Great was installed as ruler in 37 BC. He claimed that he was Jewish, but he did not have Jewish blood in him. It marked the beginning of Herodian rule. Once Herod took control of Judea, he saw strategic advantages in the mountaintop fortress. You see, during his reign over Israel, Herod had become paranoid about potential invaders. He would have a place to go if the Jewish people revolted, or if his Roman master, Mark Antony, were to give his kingdom to Cleopatra of Egypt. He believed his life would be in danger if she ever gained control of the area. Therefore, Masada's primary function was to provide Herod with an emergency escape plan, as he could quickly leave Jerusalem for the safety of his impregnable fortress. Herod was a master builder, one of the best in all of history. It is a testimony to Herod's vigor that he created a fortress in such a remote location that was very difficult for anyone, including himself, to reach. The top of the plateau, being more than 20 acres in size and nearly 1,300 feet above sea level, provided great protection. Herod also built everything needed in the event of a siege. Around the top of the mountain, Herod's workmen constructed a wall nearly 20 feet high and 12 feet wide. Atop the wall, he built 37 lookout towers, some nearly 80 feet high. At the top was a heavily guarded gate, massive gate, that provided a final barrier to anyone wishing to enter. Besides Masada being a place of refuge for King Herod, he wanted a winter resort in the warm climate of the Dead Sea. He built himself two elaborate palaces, the Western Palace and the Northern Palace, constructing them in the classic style of the early Roman Empire. The three-tiered Northern Palace can be seen on the right side of the mountain, with lavish living quarters with mosaic floors and frescoed walls, a semicircular balcony that offered absolutely spectacular views down to the Dead Sea. For luxury, the fort was complete with all the amenities of Rome. Great retaining walls held up the lowest level and are still present, a testimony to the genius of Herod's engineers and their vision for creating structures that defy nature. The round middle terrace had two concentric rows of columns that created a beautiful balcony for relaxation. Herod also built barracks, storerooms, swimming pools, mikvahs or baptismals, cisterns, armory, public baths, and an ingenious water collection system with the ability to grow and store crops and to fill his luxurious swimming pools and bathing complexes. The amount of water needed was staggering. There were several swimming pools on top of the desert mountain where very little rain fell. The main bath complex was one of the largest in all of Israel, and there were several smaller private ones for Herod in each of his palaces. Since the floods in the wadi below were unreliable, Herod needed water sufficiently for his family and staff. Herod frequently defied nature in his attempt to build a legacy for himself. Providing the amount of water needed on Masada was part of that legacy. Herod built 12 massive cisterns to provide 1,400,000 cubic feet of water. One scholar has estimated that if all the cisterns were half full, there would be enough water to sustain thousands of people for 10 years. Masada was well equipped for people to withstand a long siege. The contrast between the surrounding desert and the abundance of water inside the fortress would have impressed anyone who visited this place. One of the highlights of our visit to Masada was entering the large bathhouse complex, which was also built by King Herod. As you enter the outer courtyard, you can see a model of what it would have looked like. This helped us to visualize the bathhouse, which was an integral and vital part of Roman culture. The bathhouses were not only for washing, but also for relaxing and enjoying spa-type treatments, and for socializing. Private bathhouses were a luxury afforded only by the very wealthy, especially for those living on Masada, in the middle of a desert where water was rare and a valuable commodity.
You're gonna head into the bathhouse. Close your eyes.
Splish splash, I was taking a bath long about a Saturday night.
Herod's engineering of the four-room bathhouse is another architectural marvel. Royal guests would first exercise in the outer courtyard, then enter the changing room, which was an elegant room richly decorated with frescoes. Head into a room which amazingly had a furnace that heated water that was channeled from one of the cisterns from the outside. This provided hot water underneath a raised floor which is held up by 200 short clay pillars, which you can see here. The hot air beneath the floor would circulate and create heat, and the heat rising from the floor produced a Turkish bath effect, something like a modern-day sauna. And then also the walls were even lined with hollow clay pipes, which were also pumped full of hot air. After entering an adjoining room where they were scrubbed clean and oiled by slaves, bathers entered the final room where they doused themselves in a pool of refreshing cold water. Today, the hot room floor has been partially reconstructed so that visitors can get an idea of what it would have looked like. When you exit the bathhouse, you can see where they had the furnace to warm the waters and pump the hot air into the walls and into the area beneath the floor. Pretty remarkable stuff. We're on the top of the bathhouse. In one way, you're on top of the world up here looking down, but then you realize you're already so low in the world, you're in the lowest part of the world.
The synagogue at Masada is the oldest known one in the world. It was originally built by Herod, with the Jewish zealots adding the seats later from taking stones from other buildings at Masada. It is built right into the double outer defensive walls. It faced east toward the temple in Jerusalem. The small room is where they kept the Torah scrolls, and some were even found buried there. Today, new Torah scrolls are written there.
5 minutes will be right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Baruch Hashem.
Yes.
These are called dovecotes towers, which housed doves and pigeons, which were used for food and fertilizer for the crops, as well as for delivering messages.
Herod had two palaces. We saw the one on the north side.
The Western Palace at Masada was Herod's official royal residence. It occupied more than 37,000 square feet and contained royal apartments, bathrooms, a cold water pool, and a large reception hall with magnificently decorated mosaic pavement.
You can picture the patio parties up here.
The mosaic floors pictured here are from the private bathhouse in the Western Palace. The multicolored geometric designs are typical of Herod's construction. Made of many tiny stones called tesserae of different mineral types, mosaics became a significant skill of the Jewish people during and after Herod's life.
Another mikvah here. Wow. This is a nice big one here. Wow, it's like the Grand Canyon over here.
Don't need to go to Arizona anymore.
Visitors to Israel are still amazed at the great vision Herod displayed in his building programs. As we walk around and see some of the ruins left at Masada, it really underscores Herod's devotion to himself, providing for his own safety, satisfying his need for the finest luxuries, and establishing a name for himself were his obsessions. Amazingly, in spite of the luxury and the cost of the fortress, with the elaborate 2 palaces and all the construction Herod did, Herod probably hardly spent any time there, if at all. We've reached the west side of Masada and see the large stones used for the Roman catapults. Ominous reminders of the incredible history that took place here. And looking off to the side, we can see the remains of the Roman siege ramp.
So it took them 3 or 4 months for the Roman army to build the ramp.
This is quite honestly one of the most fascinating stories I've ever heard, and being at the top of Masada, looking down at that ramp, it's chilling, especially with vivid scenes from the epic miniseries Masada I mentioned flooding my mind. In a strange way, I can almost feel somewhat of what it was like to have experienced that famous battle and the fate of the Jewish rebels who lived here. I want to begin by recounting the few years that led up to the battle, as we need to set the stage for what was one of the most tumultuous times in Israel's remarkable history. For 100 years, Rome had the Jews under their thumb, and through the years, the Jews mostly tolerated it. But by 66 AD, violence flared in Judea. Meanwhile, Messianic Jews and Gentiles were being thrown to the lions in the arena. Recently, Caesar Nero had the apostles Peter and Paul killed. And Rome was burned to the ground. There was so much blame put on the Jews, who were desperate for God to intervene and overthrow the Romans. A sect of zealot Jews decided to take matters into their own hands, declaring revolution to be God's solution. The Romans were in turmoil. The various Jewish sects were in turmoil. Tens of thousands of Jews were slaughtered, and it all came to a head in 70 AD with the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. With that, the entire world of the Jewish people, along with all hope, had been almost completely destroyed as they watched their precious temple burn to the ground. Titus, with his 80,000 plus soldiers, were victorious, and as many as 1 million Jews died, and numerous others were subjected to slavery. This is the stage that was now set for the events of Masada. In 66 AD, a group of Jewish zealots known as Sakari daggermen, as that was their weapon of choice, led by Eleazar ben Yair, overcame the Roman legion at Masada and took refuge during the First Jewish-Roman War. Later, after the destruction of the Jewish temple in 70 AD, even more Jewish rebels fled to the desert fortress. It was the last Jewish stand against the Romans, and as such was an embarrassment to Rome, that even though the formidable powers of Rome had recently nearly completely demolished and demoralized the Jews in the war, now they had to deal with these ragtag rebels holding out in this one Roman fort. Rome wanted to make an example out of them and crush these rebels once and for all. Around 72 AD, Romans under the command of Flavius Silva focused on freeing Masada of its rebel inhabitants. Silva mobilized Fretensis X, the Roman legion encamped in southern Jerusalem. Accompanying the Roman soldiers were thousands of Jewish prisoners brought to the encampment to serve as slave labor. The total entourage must have reached a staggering 15,000 people to the foot of Masada. The sight of such a formidable fortification at Masada must have initially disheartened even the most roughened legionnaire. Sizing up the situation, though, Silva put the troops to work right away. To prevent the zealots from escaping, he built a 6-foot-thick siege wall erected all around the entire mountain. 8 base camps were established. Silva's camp was on the northwestern side of Masada. From here, he could oversee the construction of his most important siege work, the ramp. According to Josephus, in a staggeringly massive construction project, 8,000 Roman soldiers, using tons of dirt, large stones, and thousands of Jewish slaves, built a massive assault ramp. The Jewish defenders attempted to thwart the ramp's construction by rolling huge stones, each weighing close to 100 pounds, down the side of the mountain. Although this defensive action certainly caused serious injury, it was not enough to stop the concentrated efforts of the legion. In a ghastly turn of events, the Romans at one point started launching Jewish slaves up to Masada from the catapults. They said that unless Ben Yair and his people surrendered, they would keep killing the Jews. Flavius Silva thought that this was absolutely barbaric and beyond Rome's dignity, so he caused an immediate halt to that, a temporary reprieve and some sanity for a moment. After 3 or 4 months, the massive labor project was finished. The Romans' next step was to construct a large ironclad siege tower. Amazingly, this siege tower was approximately 80 feet high and featured at the end of the beam a massive iron ram head. Getting the massive siege tower and battering ram hundreds of feet up to the walls of Masada was no small feat. Thousands of Romans and slaves used flat and vertical wood beams to create timber bracings filled with packed stones, rubble, and dirt. They compacted the white chalky dirt of the ramp and hundreds at a time slowly moved the tower up the ascent, all the while having rocks and arrows rain down upon them. As they inched up the ramp and closer to the walls of Masada, they were now more vulnerable to the barrage from the defenders. The Roman legion fired ballista stones from small catapults, mainly from the assault tower itself. Some of these rocks, amazingly, can be still seen today at the top of the mountain. The tower now stood taller than the walls of Masada, and so the Romans sent a flurry of arrows down upon the Zealots. With a desperate, furious barrage from the Zealots, the 10th Legion began pummeling the wall. While the intimidating ram head crashed into the casement wall. When the breach of the wall was finally made, the Romans saw that the Zealots had built another wall behind it. This too was a double wall made of wood built with dirt as filler. The battering ram proved unsuccessful against this wall, for the dirt helped to cushion the blows. Consequently, Flavius Silva commanded that the wall be set on fire. When a north wind blew the fire back into the Roman soldiers, the Jewish defenders believed that God was coming to their aid. However, hope was dashed when the wind shifted to the south and tossed the flames back onto the wooden wall, setting it ablaze. As the wall burned, the Romans decided to retire to their camps and wait until the following day for the coup de grâce, the final victory. Nisan 14, amazingly, Passover, 73 AD, came to an end with the Romans dreaming of conquest and glory. As their wall burned and the Zealots had very little hope left, they faced a terrible choice.
If they surrendered, the Romans would crucify them as an example to the would-be rebels throughout their empire. Or they could die fighting and leave their wives and children to rape and slavery.
The Zealot commander Eleazar made a speech reaffirming their belief that God created people to be free. He said in effect, it would be greater for us to die at our own hands than to hand our own flesh over to the pagans.
Since we long ago resolved never to be servants to the Romans, nor to any other than to God himself, who alone is the true and just Lord of mankind. The time is now come that obliges us to make that resolution true in practice. We were the very first that revolted, and we are the last to fight against them. And I cannot but esteem it as a favor that God has granted us, that it is still in our power to die bravely and in a state of freedom.
Having spent several years fighting the Romans and seeing their culture and their temple, their precious temple, destroyed, the freedom fighters agreed with Eleazar. Josephus recorded the tragic events that took place next.
To avoid the miseries that were to follow from their enemies, they resolved on the necessity of doing their own execution. Miserable men indeed were they whose distress forced them to slay their own wives and children with their own hands. The husbands tenderly embraced their wives and took their children into their arms and gave the longest parting kisses to them with tears in their eyes. Yet at the same time, they did complete that which they had resolved on. Not able to bear the grief they were under for what they had done, and esteeming it an injury to those they had killed to live even the shortest piece of time after them, they then chose 10 men by lot to slay all the rest. And they offered their necks to the stroke of those who executed that melancholy office. And when these 10 men had without fear killed them all, they made the same rule for casting lots for themselves, that he whose lot it was should first kill the other 9, and after all should kill himself. Now, for the Romans, they expected that they should be fought in the morning. But when they made their assault upon the fortress, they saw no enemy, but a terrible solitude on every side.
When they went in, they found the Jewish rebels had set fire to their homes. They burned everything of value from the fortress, leaving only their food and weapons. They wanted the Romans to know that they had not died of starvation or lack of weapons. Though Herod built the fortress as a testimony to his own power, it is remembered today as a symbol of the Jewish desire for freedom. Almost 2,000 years ago, these Jewish zealots were seeking freedom from Rome and took their last stand. And the echoes of Masada's past continue to influence Israel today. For many years, army recruits swore their oath of allegiance at Masada, remembering the ancient defeat of the zealots. They are given a gun and a Hebrew Bible, and they swear to never let Masada fall again. Masada was left untouched for centuries until being rediscovered by 2 American biblical scholars in 1843. Extensive archaeological excavations didn't take place until 120 years later in 1963. And due to its remote location, Masada has been left untouched for almost 2,000 years. Not only is it an incredibly interesting historical place to visit, with Masada's rugged and majestic beauty truly a sight to behold, but there's nothing like it in the world. You feel very special to be there and to actually be able to go back in time and sort of relive the memories of those amazing Jewish patriots that were there, taking their last stand against the formidable foe of the Roman Empire. In 2001, Masada was declared a World Heritage Site, and today is still one of Israel's most popular tourist attractions. One of the most incredible places to see in all of Israel. David hid from King Saul in the general area of Masada. The text doesn't tell us whether David ever stayed at Masada, but we know that he hid in strongholds like it. The writer of 1 Samuel recorded, "David stayed in the desert strongholds. Day after day Saul searched for him, but God did not give David into his hands." 1 Samuel 23:14. During his wilderness hiding, David wrote beautiful psalms about his trust in God. He used the picture of a desert fortress to describe God's protection. He said, "The Lord is my rock and my fortress and my deliverer. My God is my rock in whom I take refuge." Psalm 18:2. In this psalm, David actually used the Hebrew word Masada. Even if he never stayed at Masada, David had surely seen or heard of its huge size and steep cliffs. As we confront evil around us, we always will find ourselves with enemies who try to break us down. But in the midst of these trials, we can say with David, "My soul finds rest in God alone. He alone is my rock and my salvation. He is my fortress, and I will never be shaken." Psalm 62:1 and 2. In the midst of his troubles, David's Masada was God himself, an unshakable source of protection and strength, and our only source of protection and strength. If we, like King Herod or the Jewish zealots, try to find safety in the Masadas we build for ourselves, we will ultimately fail, for only God gives true freedom from the world's troubles. It was an emotional ride to experience Masada and all that amazing history, and now just a short drive away is the Qumran area.
You can see some of the caves in the distance. Caves of Qumran.
Located about 6 miles south of Jericho and near the area where John the Baptist was baptizing, Qumran served as the home of the Essenes, a Jewish sect existing in Yeshua's day. It was an isolated community, and the Essenes could live out their beliefs in separation from other religious groups of their time, which they saw as corrupt. Water played an important role in the Essenes' theology. They believed that water was a symbol of purification and must be living or moving, not drawn by the hand. So they developed a system in which rainwater ran on its own into the mikvahs, or ritual baths. New members were cleansed with water in a type of baptism that symbolized the spiritual cleansing that resulted from repentance and forgiveness after breaking God's laws.
These are the ruins of Qumran.
Originally inhabited around 600 BC, but resettled about the time that Yeshua was born, Qumran became an active community until the Essenes fled, some to Masada, as I mentioned earlier, and the Romans destroyed it in approximately AD 68.
This is the location of the greatest archaeological discovery of modern times, the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, nearly 1900 years later. In 1947, Bedouin shepherds noticed a small cave opening, and one of them threw a rock inside. He was surprised to hear the sound of pottery breaking, and when they went into the caves, they were disappointed that it wasn't the treasure they had imagined to be discovered. But boy, did they discover some treasure. Word of the discovery spread, and soon more caves were discovered near Qumran, containing additional scrolls and scroll fragments. And soon an official archaeological investigation was launched. Eventually, more than 800 separate scrolls were found, including copies of the Old Testament books, all except Esther, and Jewish commentary on the scriptures, hymns, and various other forms of literature. The most well-known scrolls include the Isaiah scroll, which is nearly intact, and visitors to Jerusalem can see it at the Shrine of the Book Museum, and the Copper Scroll, which describes where temple treasures were hidden, and some with prophecies of God's judgment on the Romans. The impact of the Dead Sea Scrolls on the Jewish and Christian communities was very significant, because until the Dead Sea discoveries, the oldest copies of the Hebrew Bible dated to around AD 1000, and the scrolls take us back beyond 100 BC. And amazingly, scholars have found very few differences between the scrolls and the Bible of today. Most involve just spelling changes. As it says in Scripture in 2 Timothy 3:16, truly all Scripture is God-breathed, and God has preserved the integrity of His Word. Having confirmed the truth of the Bible, certainly their discovery was not by chance. The scrolls also give striking insight into the theological and cultural settings of Yeshua's life and the life of John the Baptist and the early church and the history of Judaism. It dramatically enhances our understanding of the world of the New Testament. And while the perspective contained in the writings belonged to one small community along the Dead Sea shores, there are remarkable similarities to the teachings of Jesus, Paul, and the early Christians. And we can see just how Jewish the world of Yeshua and the New Testament really was. So for now, we leave Qumran and we head just a short distance away to the Dead Sea. Here is where the water flows from the Jordan River into the Dead Sea. and there's no way for it to get out of the lake, so it is forced to evaporate rapidly with the super dry desert conditions. In fact, it's estimated that in the whole of the Dead Sea, there's about 37 billion tons of salt. This is one of the most fascinating places you can visit. It was actually a finalist for one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. And the Dead Sea, appropriately called because nothing can survive in it for long, it's the lowest point in the earth at 1,412 feet below sea level, and it's one of the saltiest bodies of water on earth, with a 34% salinity, almost 10 times more salt than ordinary seawater. The high salt and mineral content of the Dead Sea means that this body of water has powerful healing properties. Its healing waters have been sought after ever since biblical times. Herod the Great, who reigned between 37 to 4 BC, built one of the world's first health spas along its shores. And according to legend, Cleopatra also loved the Dead Sea and used its products as part of her beauty regime. The Dead Sea's high salt level means that people can easily float on its surface, bobbing around like a cork. It's a popular and fun-filled experience when visiting Israel. Another unusual feature of the Dead Sea is that it spits up small pebbles and blocks of asphalt from deep within its surface. Ancient Egyptians used to import this to use in their mummification processes. And while the Dead Sea is one of Israel's most popular tourist destinations, it is disappearing at an alarming rate.
Officially the lowest place on the planet. It's so beautiful, these turquoise colors.
No trip to the Judean desert would be complete without ending it with a float in the Dead Sea.
We're gonna be smearing some nice black mud all over ourselves, and then we're gonna head out and wash off. I'm going full savage. Full savage, Dead Sea style. One of the nice local native girls. Rihanna L. rubbing mud all over, sliming me. If you go too far, you go whoop, your feet go behind, and your face goes in. Super, super high concentrated salt. We're getting some Dead Sea floating footage. All right, nothing like it in the world, kids. Nice little dip in the Dead Sea. The water is like a jacuzzi.
We had a lot of fun getting mineral muddied up and floating about. It's pretty impossible to actually swim in the Dead Sea, and you definitely don't want to get your face in the water. But if you want to temporarily blind yourself and simultaneously receive dirty looks or even drown, then splash around a bit. Thank you all for joining us so far through our amazing journey through the Holy Land. Next time we'll be visiting the fascinating city of David. So for now, shalom, shalom. Nothing missing, nothing broken in your lives. God bless. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, as it really helps.
You want answers? I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth!